Welcome everyone to this webinar. So today's topic is going to be a reflection of how we can enhance our teaching practice in distance learning environment. So what this presentation is really supposed to achieve is to fit roughly my many years of experience of teaching at a distance, where I'm going to try to emphasize on the things that seems to work in distance learning environment, which some of you might find useful in adapting in light of the recent development from our Vice Chancellor promoting blended learning from next academic year. So let me introduce myself first. I'm currently the course leader of a MSc in Distance Learning program in the Department of Psychology, but I also work as an associate lecturer for the Open University, and I've been doing this for a long time. So I think, in fairness, that most of my experience in distance education have been gained from the Open University, but I'm putting them in practice here at Portsmouth. So beyond the standard distance learning course that I usually teach, I've also been involved in the production of a massive open online course, which you probably also know under the acronym of MOOC. And I'm currently working on putting together an open learn course on the psychology of cybercrime. So really with all this experience, I'm touching at different type of distance learning education. So what I'm going to cover today is briefly to highlight some of the challenges to distance education from the point of view of the student, in order to provide me with a context regarding what works in delivering distance learning program. So to that end, I will talk about some practical solutions that I've identified from my experience of online teaching, while bearing in mind the tools that we have available here at the University of Portsmouth. So let's move to the challenges from the student point of view. So I originally looked at the literature and I found some amazing sources that were providing me was very useful and structured typology of the different challenges we can find in distance learning, such as learning related challenges, technical related challenges, and so on and so forth. However, because of the time restriction of this talk, I had to teach this information, and instead I'm presenting something that I think might be more useful because it is more in context. It concerns our students here in Portsmouth and the challenges that they have identified at the beginning of their course doing a distance learning degree. So just to give you a little bit of context regarding where I got this information. At the beginning of the year, our distance learning students have an induction week like every other student, and they have many activities, and part of the activities that they had to do this year was to write a mini essay at the end of the week, in which they have to talk about the challenges of studying remotely. So this exercise has been set for 3 reasons. First, because it allows us to identify students who need special support with various study skills, such as writing skills, referencing skills, etc., etc. But also it's a way for students to reflect very early on about what is to come as part of doing a distance learning degree. Because let's not forget, most of our students have never studied at a distance before. So finally, the third reason why we actually do this little exercise is that it provides us with an early opportunity to actually get our students to submit an assignment online using the Turnitin, because again, most of our students doing a postgraduate distance learning are new to the University of Portsmouth, so they really need to get used to the virtual learning environment, the specific university virtual learning environment. So this induction is an example to start with and to kind of give you the context of the things that we do in distance learning are part of the induction task to actually get our students used with their learning environment, which is specifically Moodle. So these are the challenges that they have identified and that they will have to overcome as part of doing their degree remotely. So first, our students were worried about being isolated and disconnected from their fellow students, but also from the university staff. They were also worried that they would not get enough support from the course team. They expressed some concern around time management issues. And finally, they expressed some concern with staying motivated. So our job as course developers and module coordinators is to actually put things in place to reduce those feelings of isolation, increase this or reduce this aspect of feeling of lack of support, motivation, and so on. So before I start talking about solution, I really wanted to start talking about, I wanted to remind you about 3 important criteria that we use to actually gauge module and course success. So these are engagement, satisfaction, and retention. This is very similar to campus-based teaching. However, in online teaching, we have some added difficulty because achieving student engagement is far more challenging than on-campus engagement. And you're probably going to see as you kind of develop your course a little bit more online this year, that you will have to pay extra attention about how to engage students online. And the reason for that is that students have fewer opportunities to actually engage and be part of a community. So our online teaching strategy is the idea behind those strategies is to create opportunities to engage a student, obviously using what is available at a distance, in a hope that we're actually going to increase the satisfaction and ultimately we're going to retain our student. Okay, so I've got this little recipe that I've put together. So how do we overcome these challenges and ensure that students are engaged and satisfied? The simple answer is by developing a better pedagogy, which seems like a pretty obvious statement. So how can we facilitate a better pedagogy in an online environment? So that's really the question here. So the first element, so these are the 3 things I think are very important to actually sort of overcome those challenges is, and I'm going to cover the issue of surrounding support and how we can overcome this worry or feeling of lack of support, issue around time management, motivation, and so on. The second important aspect that I think is important and I'm going to cover is something to do with interaction and building this sense of community online. And hopefully this will address issues around isolation and feeling of disconnectedness. And lastly, I think it concerns the more overall teaching strategy that I think in essence need to incorporate flexibility and adaptivity, and I will refer them as adaptive teaching strategies, using the plural here because I don't think there is a single one-size-fits-all strategy when it comes to online teaching. So it's more about being responsive. Okay, so let's have a look now at each of them in turn, and obviously I will bring a few examples, but I wanted to cover so much today that I think I'm just going to be very, very shallow here. Okay, so let's start with support. So as we are student indicated at the beginning, we need to develop a solution or we need to develop any sort of strategy that will give them a satisfaction that they are supported throughout the study. And this is really, really difficult to achieve, to make apparent and effective when you are a distance or students are studying remotely. So I think the most important thing to remember here is that students need to be guided all the way through. And I will talk to you a little bit more specific about how we can guide students a little bit later. Most of the time as well, distance learning students don't know that the support exists and where to get it from. So beyond providing some of the support we're going to talk about, we need also to promote the different type of support we can provide. So I'm going to start with the academic support and then we'll move on the non-academic support and probably we'll spend a little bit less time on the non-academic support. So with the academic support, we need to be proactive and we need to make sure that we spend time on feedback, for instance. So that's very important to actually support students around assignment preparation, assignment instruction and providing feedback because that's an important way of learning is by learning from feedback. So I will tell you a little bit more about feedback and some of the tools we can use on Moodle to actually provide more tailored feedback, more expensive feedback without be too much time consuming for the lecturer. So that's the thing. But and I think if we can try to find something that's innovative and supportive whilst maintaining a relationship between ourselves and the student when providing feedback, we're really addressing those three elements that I did tell you about a few minutes ago. Okay, so a good proportion of academic support, so if you have to run something a bit more online this year or in the next academic year, is going to be around the course content and the structure. Again, an important thing is to be available and to adapt to everyone by being versatile in the medium that you're going to provide that support. So most of the time in face-to-face, we're dealing with either email, that's probably the main thing, plus face-to-face, so people turn it in your department, in your office, or they talk to you at the end of the lecture. That is not going to happen. You still have the email, which students tend to use a lot, but there are other ways we can support students. It could be via telephone and it can be via text. And I'm going to talk about text support because it's an important thing. So when I was thinking especially about courses with large cohort of students, I was also considering taking into consideration other tools that we can use to actually support our students with big or large cohort of participants. And the tool that I'm proposing, and I've put a little icon, visual icon on the slide, is chat tool on Moodle. So I don't know if you ever come across that tool, but it's a chat. It's like any sort of chat you can find, like the chat on WebEx, etc. So you actually set up this chat tool on your Moodle site, and then you click on it when you want to you have set up your surgery hour, for instance. And then you get in it and you have the tool open, and then your student can pop in anytime and ask you a question. So this chat tool is actually very advantageous for several reasons. First of all, the students love it. We tried it several times, and we have very good feedback from students. And the reason for that, I think, is that because it's synchronous, so they really have this sort of live discussion with someone, but without the disadvantage of less favored type of communication, such as talking to someone. Because with the chat we use live texting, it is actually the most popular form of communication nowadays, because all human beings actually text a lot, far more than they used to in the past. So I think in terms of teaching, we need to incorporate those favorite type of communication within our teaching. Another advantage is that it allows students to actually have a bigger time frame for contact, because it's less restrictive on your side than really setting up a WebEx video link for an hour and standing there like a lemon with the video on. With texting and the chat box, you can have this in your background, you can do other tasks, and then as soon as a student come in and type something, then you can interrupt yourself and actually deal with it. So it actually gives you a little bit more time frame. And on the issue of time frame, I wanted to talk about time perception, because time perception online is absolutely, we don't have the same perception of time when we're online than when we're in face-to-face. So things such as a 2-hour online lecture is not going to work. It's too long. And in the same respect, an hour weekly office is not enough. So unfortunately, I don't have time to talk too much about that. But we might have time in the question and answer later on to actually discuss this a little bit further. The other thing I wanted to mention with regard to support is to make sure that your learning materials and the different type of teaching that you are going to provide is structured and that it is clear and self-evident for the student. So in order to achieve that, you need to make sure that your module is broken down in manageable chunks. That's how I'm going to call it, because it could be weekly chunk, it could be topic chunk, but it has to be broken down in really manageable chunks that makes sense why you breaking the module in that specific type of chunk. So for instance, in one of my module, I have 5 topics, and I'm going to cover those 5 topics within the 13 weeks I have for the term. So, but within each manageable chunk, you need to make sure that you provide a good mix of different support and activities. So it has to be a mix of tutor input, such as mini lectures, and we do recommend around 15 minutes each. It can be recorded, it can be live. It could be a podcast as well. That's a useful type of tutor input. It could be a written booklet. So there are different sort of way you can sort of deliver your teaching. You also need to present and offer a mix of suggested structures activities, such as workbook. I tend to use workbook, discussion activities, and so on. And you can use different type of tool on WebEx, on Moodle, sorry, such as the wiki, the forum. You can do a peer review. There is many things you can do within that. You also need to provide a weekly surgery time where you will be able to be contacted by students if they have any query on top of the normal email sort of contact. And another thing that's really important is the study guide. And I will talk a little bit more about study guide later on. I did put, you can see probably, I did put a YouTube link. So when you'll be able to retrieve those slides, you might be able to actually go and click on that link. And that link actually offers a video that I've recorded for students enrolled on the professional doctorate in forensic psychology. And it will show you the structure of the module, but as well, it will show you an example of me doing an interactive tour of the Moodle site, a little bit as a study guide about introducing the unit, or an induction week about what is the unit about. And so really giving them a virtual tour, like you will do a virtual tour of a tour of your department, a virtual tour of the module. You also need to provide some advice on study skills. You also need to, you could also refer them to the appropriate department. So with study skills, the idea is really to consolidate the study skills throughout, as you do with campus-based activity. But I think there are certain things that are more important with online teaching. And it is, as I talked to you very early on, with the sort of challenges that students identify, is a time management issue, because it's very difficult to actually manage your time when you're studying at a distance, when you're studying remotely. And I think during the induction week, this is a perfect opportunity to get the student to reflect on creating a space and a time to study whilst being at home and avoiding distraction. I have moved my office. I mean, I've been working from home for a long time, and I've moved my office several times in order to avoid distraction. So it's not just about finding the time, it's also creating the space for the student to actually study. We have different sort of student sort of characteristic, and some students do not have, or they have to share a computer with someone, or they will have some caring duty to do if children don't go back to school and parents need to work. So we have different sort of situation and scenarios. So we really need to think about and get students to actually sit down and reflect about when they're going to create the space for when and where they're going to create the space and time to study. But also that will be only possible if you give them more information about time management in terms of the requirement of your module or of your course. So you need to communicate with the students really earlier on how much engaged they need to be every week. But I will tell you a little bit more about that as part of the study guide thing that I'm going to cover. You also need, as part of your academic support, to actually chase their engagement and their progress. I think the university is working a lot on analytic for engagement. And I know, working in a different university, that we have ways of looking at when people logging on Moodle, last time they log in, whether they actually read a forum post, etc., etc. And I think it's useful. However, from our perspective as lecturer, I think there are things we can do to make sure that we actually chase our student progress and engagement. And this is mainly through guided activity, to assess the understanding of the material and reflect on the learning. So the guided activity, it could be guided activity that they share with you, but again, when we have a big cohort of students, it might not be possible to actually read exercise and activities and answer and respond to activities that you've set up. It could be other things. It could be peer support, collaboration between students themselves, where they actually look at each other, response, and kind of support each other like that. And it could be doing a group work. So you really, what you have to do is just getting feedback from a group of students. I mean, the importance of personal tutoring, I think, in online teaching when you're dealing with big group of students is really important. And obviously the YouTube link that I've provided above will give you also a flavor of the different activity that I've set up in order to check on my student engagement and progress. In terms of non-academic support now, that's we are moving on a little bit on the slide. Sometimes it's the case that you need to direct a student to the right person, but really, and overall, I will say the skills that we have to develop as a teacher, online teacher, is to become very intuitive of the students becoming less engaged and less satisfied. So, I mean, it's easier to say and to do when you have a small cohort of students. So with our master student, we have 20 at top. So it's really easy to actually keep an eye on students. It's slightly more complicated with a bigger group size, but then again, as I said, personal tutoring probably is helpful in that area. But I think you need to make sure that you do talk on your students. If you think that a student is losing touch with the course and becoming less engaged, talk to the student on the phone. That's the thing that we do with online teaching. We also text or email our students to remind them that an assignment in doing psychology, in Department of Psychology, our course administrator actually reminds students when an assignment is due on Moodle via the forum. And overall, you need to show that you care and you're empathetic to their situation. And I think that's generally what we do on campus-based teaching as well. So I'm not fully preaching some convinced people here. But yeah, it's really showing that you're available, that you're approachable, though you need to set some boundaries very early in the course, and I'm going to cover that next. And maintain contact in general. I do email my students because you don't see them. So I do email them every 2 weeks if I haven't heard from them, if they haven't posted on the forum. Just a general email to check how they're doing. Okay, I'm slightly running out of time, but creating and managing online interaction.
Don't worry about the time. You've got plenty of time, so please,
okay.
You're absolutely fine.
Okay. So in terms of, and it is very difficult to create and manage interaction when you're online, because what you want to do is to create and maintain meaningful interaction like you will have in face-to-face, but within the artificiality of the environment, which is online. And you need to make sure that you create those interactions very early on, and then the rest of the year it's going to be about the maintenance of those relationships for the rest of the academic year. So there is 4 sort of area of interaction you have to create and manage. And this is the learner-teacher interaction, the learner-content interaction, the course team interaction, and the student interaction or learner interaction. So what I will say in terms of developing and managing, or at least developing and creating those interactions, is that probably induction week and the earlier part of the academic year is going to be the perfect opportunity to create this sense of community. And the more you are seen and heard, the better. So live interaction are great. So any induction activities where students meet the course team, the course administrator, and the head of department will give them a better sense of belonging. So this is something we're going to do on our current distance learning master program. Is during the induction week, we're going to set up a meeting where we'll have our course administrator, myself as the course leader, and our head of department. I've already asked my head of department to actually make some time, just introduce themselves so that they actually can put a face and a voice onto a name. And I think it's really important. It doesn't have to be synchronous. It could be asynchronous. It could be a video being recorded. Synchronous activities are also very important, such as a module coordinator introduction is very useful in creating this initial contact. And I've given you, again, you can see there is a YouTube link which you can watch at leisure later on. And it's a very short welcome video where I've sort of present myself, because I'm module coordinating one module, present myself very briefly, but then introduce the module and kind of trying to make it a little bit warm so that it's not this kind of deserted module. There is someone behind mentoring, and they can see that there is someone behind all those information that they are provided with. And as I said to you earlier on, you need to be available, approachable, empathetic, and so on, but it has to be within certain boundaries that you're going to set up very early in the year. And I've done some face-to-face, but the bulk of my teaching is pretty much online, and I have to very quickly and very early to set the boundaries with my student in terms of contact time, because it's very easy for your personal life or to work life take over your personal life. So what I tend to do is I tend to record video introducing myself in my sort of academic capacity, etc., etc. But also I send very early on in the first few weeks a welcome email where I present myself more on a personal and humanized level by saying this is my name, I have 2 children. And the reason why I mention I have 2 children is not to actually say I'm 2 children, but to actually for them to actually draw a picture of what is my life and how I need to sort of juggle with my work life and my personal life, and the fact that, for instance, I might not be available from 3 o'clock because I have to pick up the children from school, etc., etc. It's really easy, and it's very it's humanized, this contact and this interaction, if you can really send a personal email, not revealing too much, obviously, but enough so that they get an idea of what sort of person you are. I tend to say the sort of things I like doing as a hobby and things like that. So it's really sort of an ice-breaking activity, but anyway. Also, you can provide them with information about when you work. I mean, I work for 2 universities, so I have working days for 1 university. So I just tend to say, well, I don't work on Mondays for this university, etc. When it is acceptable to actually call me and text me, when it is not acceptable to actually call me, such very late in the evening and things like that. And I tend to say that sometimes if they call me and I can't answer the phone, that it doesn't mean that I don't want to talk to them and I'm actually busy. So it's actually better to text beforehand to make sure I'm free. So that's the sort of thing. So kind of giving them an indication about how I work and I like to interact with my students while not being too abrupt and rude. Another thing that I tend to do as well as an ice-breaking activity, just to give you some food for thought, if you need some, especially within a module rather than the course, is during induction week, I did in the past do a meeting where we actually discuss all together, lecturer and student, about setting up a contract of the do's and don'ts of how to behave online, how to behave in live session, the things that we can do, the things we can't do, etc., etc., and things about supporting each other and not being judgmental and all that sort of thing. And then once we have finalized the contract, which can be sort of transferred into a wiki page, we then sort of already did the contract, we finalize the contract, and then, for the rest of the year, we all have to follow that contract. In terms of the learner content interaction, how you're going to sort of create and manage this interaction between the learner and the content that you're presenting is by making sure that you provide them with, as I said to you earlier on, a good mix of tutor input and structure activities while making use that you're using all the different tools on Moodle. So it's not too boring, not too repetitive. Because the key idea is that you want students to engage. So if the course material is not engaging, they're not likely to engage. Course team interaction, let's not forget that we are human beings as well. And I say that because I work in isolation myself when I work from home. And so it's very important that I actually talk to my colleagues, that we promote teamwork, that we ask each other about opinions. So we actually help each other and we actually make the whole course a better place rather than just working individually on our separate module. And lastly, student interaction. This is an important one because, in campus-based sort of environment, students will actually meet outside, they go to the pub, they go to the student union, they play sports. I mean, all that sort of social outside of the lecture. They also work together. So we have a lot of students working together in the library and do things like that. So how can we create or allow students to create this small community outside in these online environments? So what you have to do, and that's what I tend to do very early on with my students, is I actually suggest things to them. I said, you need to be in contact with the other students. You need to be in contact with people who actually go through the same thing than you. So you can moan about your lecturer, you can you can work, you can support each other, you can exchange references and stuff like that. So you can suggest to them that they set up a group work on Zoom without the university input. They could actually exchange phone number and set up a WhatsApp group where they can actually have some sort of texting. And it could be other things that you can think about. But within the learning environment, I think the structure activities could be done in collaboration or again, live tutor input. And there is different way of creating and maintaining relation between students themselves. So when you design your course or your module, make sure that you actually use the tools that will enable students to actually form relationship with other students. So the things that I tend to do is wiki, forum, I've done peer review. So even for assignments, students actually support each other. So that's the different things we tend to do. Okay. Sorry if I'm boring you, by the way. The last one, the last sort of element of this better pedagogy thing that I want to talk about is this adaptive teaching strategy, which sounds very pompous. And the reason why I use these words and this terminology is that I want something that encompasses the fact that online students are diverse in their characteristic and their preference, even when we transfer campus-based students to online environments. So we need to adapt our teaching to their ever-changing needs. And a good way to be adaptive and flexible is, as I said to you many times already, is to actually offer greater choice and opportunity of teaching material and support, which is known as blended learning. So in a nutshell, and I know it's very simplistic, blended learning is about providing students with an assortment of different tools, and we can distinguish between asynchronous tool and synchronous tool. And the difference between the two is that they will actually provide different benefits, and that's why it's important of using both synchronous and asynchronous or asynchronous tools. For instance, synchronous teaching, such as live session, will develop this sense of community, and it's a great tool to develop interaction in general. Whereas as asynchronous tool, such as a forum discussion, will allow students to actually digest information and to reflect on it. So you can have different sort of benefit based on the different type of tools you're using. And that's why we're talking a lot about blended learning at the moment. So I also know that at the moment we have an awareness of this need to avoid death by PowerPoint, which might have done today and this very minute. And I agree that small live session or recorded session are usually more effective than longer session. But it's also possible to put together a longer session while offering some natural break within the session, where students are given the opportunity to be active participants and be involved in their own learning and be reflective and develop a sense of community by interacting with their fellow students. I was talking this morning with one of my colleagues because we were brainstorming about the fact that, yes, small sessions are really good, but with distance learning, student is very hard to actually get people all together at the same time. And that's why we were talking about, you know what, we can still have slightly longer session, but it's very important that the delivery of information is not in a kind of a long delivery information. There is natural break in between. So maybe 10 minutes worth of delivery of information, and then they have 10 minutes to reflect on their learning. And on WebEx, I don't know if you're aware of it, on WebEx, we have this whiteboard aspect. So what I tend to do with my slide, and you can see I've moved slightly to give you all the tools, you might actually see it, sorry. What I tend to do on my PowerPoint is I put a white slide with question at the top, and then students have the opportunity to actually play with the slide and write stuff on the slide, and that's very useful. And they really like it because they do not have to use their microphone, which, especially in a big classroom, they're not very confident about the accuracy and the pertinence of their intervention. So no way they're going to actually put their name on the front line and use their voice. Whereas the text and the whiteboard will kind of make them the whole intervention a little bit more anonymous. So they tend to like it. With assignment feedback, I did tell you very early on about feedback, and I'm going to give you this thing that I tend to use, and students, again, actually love it. is I'm using the voice comment on the Turnitin feedback. So I still tend to use the text comment, but what I also do is I record some voice comments. You have, I think, 3 minutes worth of recording per student, and it's really useful. Students actually love it, and the reason for that is that I think it gives a human side to feedback. For us, it's less time consuming, and I think I'm probably less abrupt when I actually put comment as a kind of verbal comment. Coherent course module design, we kind of already discussed that, but it's pretty much about following a pattern and really engaging students and providing them with a wide array of tools. Ease of navigation of the virtual learning environment. Again, do listen to your feedback. If something doesn't work, try to change it on Moodle. Don't wait until the end of the year. And also ask your e-learning team to actually help you if you're not sure if something is kind of flowing and if there is a way you can improve the visual appearance of Moodle. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, which I've kind of managed to actually plot along with this along the whole presentation, is the study guide. And this is something we don't tend to do on campus-based teaching, but it's something that's absolutely vital with our online students, because we need to give them an expectation of what's coming, of the objective, of what they need to achieve, of what they need to do in the next week, in the next 2 weeks, in the next month, in the next several weeks. So the study guide could be in the form of an audio, it could be in the form of a video or written commentary of what students have to achieve. But also it could be something that's slightly more interactive, where you can assess student engagement by presenting the first part of your study guide and what they have to achieve and what they have to engage with, the sort of material and activities. But then at the end of that study guide, they have questions where they can maybe identify the important issue that were covered throughout the chunk of teaching, or maybe identify key papers that they have look up, and so you can also check engagement by making the study guide a little bit more interactive. Okay, so just as a way of a conclusion, really what I wanted to say is I've talked to you about all the different tools as I've sort of were talking about the sort of teaching that we're doing in online environment. And just to remind you, the Moodle, our virtual learning environment, is the main sort of space to actually do our teaching. And it has a lot of feature. So we do have what I tend to use more than the other is the voice comment on assignment. I also record my video and embed them on Moodle, and I tend to upload them on YouTube and then embed them on Moodle, and it's very easy to do. And what I like about YouTube video as well is that you get some captions. So with these new rules about having subtitle, it's great. I tend to use forum, and I tend to be very generous with the amount of forum I'm using. So I tend to use a forum per chunk of teaching or block of teaching. I don't know how you want to call it, a week of teaching. I tend to use the wiki to get the student to collaborate and work together. I also work and use a lot of podcast materials, which are voice file, things that I record myself about things a bit more in practice that I can't put on paper, which students actually love, because students want to actually learn, they want to engage with their course, but they don't particularly want to sit down at the computer and actually do it. So by having a voice file or a podcast, it gives them the opportunity of actually doing a little bit of learning while being on the go. So it could be commuting, or it could be doing something else, doing the cooking. I don't know if you might have done it yourself as well, when you actually do something as you do another task. I'm using the workshop, and the workshop is where you actually do the peer review. So it's students actually upload the document, then you allocate them with another student or another group of students, and each other are going to actually review someone else and provide the feedback which they upload back. So it really gives you this kind of feeling of sense of community and collaboration between students. I use Choice, which is a polling sort of tool. to set up meetings or to ask about any sort of opinion. I use WebEx meeting and I embed them on Moodle. So as I said to you, Moodle is the main source of their teaching. So they just have to turn up on Moodle and that's where they're going to find everything. I use the chat, as we talked about, and I use the H5P content, mainly with study guide and timeline to actually give them indication about how they need to organize themselves while not being too prescriptive. In terms of live session, I tend to use WebEx and Google Hangout because mainly they are the ones supported by university, and support also by email, telephone, text. And as a way of finishing this webinar, I wanted to also emphasize that the induction week, if you set up something online, is going to be the vital week where you're going to set the tone in terms of support and in terms of creating a sense of community. Thank you very much.
Axel, that's really, really fantastic presentation. Thank you ever so much. I think where we are at the moment, that was a lovely introduction to some basic underpinning theory that really does almost like the critical success factors for making sure our delivery is where it needs to be. Colleagues, an opportunity, we've got 15 minutes or so if anybody would like to drop in with some questions. If I try and backtrack through the what we've got already, so let's have a look here. Axel, any tips for combining teaching for both campus and distance learning students for activities to avoid a distinction between the two groups? And that's from Anthony.
So can you repeat, because there was some background noise?
Yeah, so can I remind people, can you please make sure your videos are still muted so we can hear everybody? So the question from Anthony was, any tips for combining teaching for both on-campus and distance learning students, open brackets, for asynchronous activities to avoid any division between the two?
That's an interesting one. That's not something that I have a lot of experience of because I've never been in that situation. However, I think it could be, that's an interesting one actually. It could be the same sort of task, but obviously one is sort of delivered online and something is delivered on campus, and I can't see how this will create any sort of disparity between the two. But maybe I'm missing the question.
I think if I may, I did something recently where I think I know that it's finding the right technology that you can use asynchronously and synchronously. So I think people can see the results. Anthony, if you're there, please unmute, and if we can offer clarification, if you'd like to add anything to that, now's your time.
Yes, hi. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah, so yeah, it was really just a question because the course that I teach on and within our school is quite sort of laboratory based, and so we're kind of obviously making sure that all of the activities are going to be either alternatives or creative so that they can be delivered online, looking at microscope slides, specimens, you know, that kind of thing in the earth sciences. And obviously that we've had you know, some really useful information in some recent sort of seminars and things on delivering distance learning, but obviously the model that we're going to have to be adopting for teaching block 1 and possibly teaching block 2, if people aren't being sort of forced to be on campus, is that we're going to have to deliver face-to-face and online as well. And obviously, you know, with specimens and things, we just need to try and make sure that everyone's getting the same experience, well, as close to the same experience as possible, but also trying to involve everyone. So I think it comes down to some of the technology and software, whether we can have methods of maybe having it'd be really nice to have one chat in a classroom with the students that are on campus, but also maybe have up on screen the students that are dialing in for the distance learning in some of the synchronous activities. But I don't know if the technology is there for us to do that across campus, or if it's going to be put in place. So I didn't know whether you taught online only or whether it was blended. So whether there are any tips for that.
I mean, I do blended where I do face-to-face and online, but it's the same student who choose to come face-to-face. So we provide them with the opportunity, so it's their choice. So I think, and it's slightly more difficult when we're dealing with a different discipline. Psychology is probably one of the best discipline because our subject are human beings. So it's really easy to actually transfer something online. So I'm afraid, I think there is some issue around the one that use materials and more practical lab. I know that in the science faculty, they've been talking around maybe delaying the whole practical aspect so when people can actually come back to campus, but it's not offering you with a solution, unfortunately. So I'm afraid, you know, there will be some issue around practicals, but video maybe not like when students actually touch things, but maybe videos where if there are some resources and if there is a way of recording those resources could give them some form of basic in terms of actually looking and seeing what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Thanks.
Any more questions, colleagues? Should we ever see if I can find, where are we? Does Moodle have the facility to live stream peer feedback to a voting system to engage engagement? Bex, I think you're there. I think you answered that one. Would you like to chip in on that one if you're there?
Yeah, sorry, what was that, Andy? I was just looking up an article for Anthony.
Right. The question around, does Moodle have the facility to live stream peer-to-peer feedback via a voting system to gauge engagement, for example?
No, it doesn't. So you can have plugins made available for Moodle, which isn't my area. That would be our educational technologist team, and we don't have that plugin at the moment. So one of the most popular pieces of technology that people use for live stream voting is Mentimeter. So you could hold a WebEx, or if you're doing face-to-face, you can have all the students in one room, and then you can have them input a code on their device for the Mentimeter, and they would be able to vote on whatever voting polling that you'd set up, and then they'd all be able to see it on the screen that you were presenting from.
And that does really well. Anything to add to that?
Me?
Mentimeter does work really well. The other thing you can also do if you want them to do it is, if you have a Bristol Online account, you can actually set up a remote voting system where you can actually see the results coming in at the same time, and you can be a little bit more structured around the types of feedback questions that you might want to ask colleagues. Any other questions? Let's have a look. So,
can I just say something to Anthony if he's still there, Andy?
Fire in, Bex. Yes, please.
Can you hear me, Anthony?
Yes, I can. Thanks. Yeah.
It was just you mentioned about you're going to be delivering labs to both distance and online and distance and campus-based students.
Potentially, yeah. Obviously, depending on whether we can do them in the small groups or not, but sort of forwards as well. Later.
It's just because I'm working with James Brown on a project where we'll be developing resources for guinea pig ileum. And showing students from a distance how they would do organ baths and stuff like that. So we're developing content where instead of students actually doing the process in real life, we would give them a selection of different things that they could choose from, and then James will provide me videos to show students of each of the different outcomes. Okay. And I was just thinking, if you developed content like that, then it would give students a kind of a more, although they couldn't do it in real life, it would give them a variety of different scenarios, which would give them lots of different answers as to what it was that they would be expecting in a real life laboratory. Also, if you had a face-to-face thing going on and you wanted to have the distance learning students involved, you could always set up a WebEx for them to listen into at the same time, or you could at least record your lecture and then send it out to the distance learning students, and then hold maybe a blended session webinar like a few days later for them to kind of have a peer discussion.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's sort of what I was planning. It was just to see whether that was the way I'd thought of doing it, and sort of has been mentioned before. But I just wondered if there are any other sort of tips, and if there are any sort of people that were doing it already for some of the courses that were offered for distance learners as well. But no, that's great. That sounds really interesting. Thanks.
Lovely. Axel, can I ask a question of you, please? Because I'm writing some training materials now for this transition module that we're working on, and I found myself slightly addicted to the book in Moodle rather than adding everything on the page. I've kind of like created my first interactive workbook, and I've ended up putting everything in it. Is that right? Am I heading in the right direction? Because it flows really nicely, and I've been able to embed actually everything into it, so it sits together really well, which I didn't think it would actually, and it does.
I've done that, and I've done a PDF version, and students didn't read the online book at all. So I don't know.
The students don't read the online book.
Well, maybe because they were offered the PDF version, so
Yeah.
they download the PDF and then they can do it. But you have to think about students who can't log online. They just want to download something and then doing in their offline, really.
So can I ask you a question? Because that's really interesting, because over the last month or so in lockdown, I've done some training for Cranwell and some training for Hampshire Police that's asynchronous. And actually, before I got on, they didn't have a Moodle page. I just created an interactive PDF document that had all the links to all the stuff in it. So I must admit, when I started this gig, God, I was writing interactive teaching handbooks in '92 as a technologist at the University of Gloucestershire. I'm finding myself going back to '92 and thinking, actually, in addition to the stuff that they have to have online, they do like a hard copy of something, even if it's a PDF document that they can refer back to in their own time, so they're not constantly having to log on to be online to check their resources.
Oh, sorry. Do you mind if I just...
Yeah.
It was just because what Andy just said, and something that you said earlier about providing videos for students, that's actually a really important thing in terms of accessibility, is providing them a hard copy of the script that you have inside that video on the Moodle page as well, for those that can't watch the video or may have, disabilities, so you provide them with a script so that they can read it through. Just wanted to add that there.
And I think that's part of the...
There's a question at the bottom from Jules. Can we address alternatives to Mentimeter that can be plugged into Moodle? I'm thinking about peer-to-peer engagement, a virtual session, and possibilities. Okay, what I've circulated, Jules, is a little attachment, a little link to an app guide that I've produced that outlines some of those alternatives to Mentimeter, and everybody feel free to chip in, Axel as well. Padlet is a great one. That's a really lovely collaborative spaceboard. You can actually embed the PDF. You can take the embed code and actually embed that on your Moodle page. I've just done that actually in a workbook. We've also got Vivox. So there's different ones. Please, I don't want to get bogged down today, but if you look at the TAIL training pages, Becky, can you remember can you provide the URL for the Google page on the site if you've got it? Because I can't remember where it is.
Yeah, I'll get it up now.
Thank you. We've got a TAIL site that's got an awful lot of guidance for online learning on it. So we'll put that link up so you can see that. There's a lot of support. You're very welcome to come back to me for guidance, and I'll point you in the direction. If you just look at the website that Becky's just pulled up, we're offering an awful lot. We've got a lot of this guidance already online as kind of like little websites already, so we can answer pretty much a lot of your questions by just pointing to something that we've probably got recorded as a previous session. The other thing I would also say is that in July we're looking at running a week-long learning and teaching festival where we're aiming to provide a lot of this kind of like training support as well. So if anybody's got any specific requirements or things that you think we should cover, please let us know. The big one that seems to have come through in the last week is basically how to do very good videoing and how to capture videos and just put the editing together, but keep it short and sweet and simple. So we'll probably do something around that. But there's loads of little apps, some of them better than the others. The one thing I would leave you all with, and I'm sure Axel would agree, is that don't get fixated with the technology first. Always think about the teaching, think about the learning outcomes first. Somebody put about, I've mentioned at the top about the tool, particularly around H5P. What do you need to do? What is the learning outcome? And then look for the tool that is the best fit for that. So what we're trying to do in this whole transition is make sure, under the principles that have come out, that everything is pedagogically led to start with. Be aspirational in terms of what you want to do, in terms of your design. And we're here to help the ACTEV and the TEL team and the Champions Network to help you deliver what you'd really, really like to do, so we can avoid the situation of just voice over PowerPoints. Has anybody got, Axel's done a brilliant presentation. Anybody else got any questions for Axel before we wrap up, please? There's loads here. Please feel free to unmute and just drop in. Would anybody like to offer any ideas of kind of things they're planning on doing for September that they'd like to share, or things that they'd like to do and perhaps not quite sure where to start?
I'm just trying to type something about subtitle and WebEx. There is subtitle on WebEx, but you might need to go onto your WebEx page where there is all the sort of where it's kind of store all your videos linked to your account, and then you need to tick a box that will give you the subtitle. That's all you have to do.
That's great, thank you. And does it do it automatically? Because when I saw it previously, it was just giving me the option to allocate someone to prepare the closed captions during the meeting, rather than it automatically generating it like in Google Meet. Because my colleague was struggling using WebEx because of a hearing issue.
For me, it is automatic. So I don't know if there is any setting in my WebEx account, and I had to remove it at the time because with my accent, I do think WebEx, the subtitle is very poor if you have a strange accent like mine. And that's why I removed mine, and it was automatic, and I didn't want students to see the waffle of nonsense in the subtitle. That's why I know there is subtitle, and it was automatic. I didn't have to turn it on. So I don't know, maybe have a look at the setting.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'll have a look in the website settings. And
WebEx is, it does its job. It is a tad clunky. Closed captioning is not something it does particularly well. I'm helping run a university research webinar at the moment, and we're capturing the videos, but we're then just linking. When you will be aware that when you record something in WebEx, it comes back to it sits in your profile site, and it's a little button on the left hand side which recording. So you've captured everything that you've got. If you share that link with the students, the transcript of that session will come up on the right hand side. So that's another immediate way of doing it. But I don't think the captioning in WebEx is perhaps as good as you get in something like in Google Meets.
No, and you can notice it with when you have like my accent, because half the word actually nonsense, whereas with YouTube, for instance, the closed caption is actually much better.
Yeah, it's like Zoom, WebEx, and they all have their own little feature, and if we combine them all, I think we'd have something that was really good. Colleagues, I'm conscious of the time. I don't think there's any more. We put some links in. Just a reminder, TEL and ACTEV are here to help. Axel, thank you for a really engaging presentation. It's just a really nice starting point to get people into it. I've learned a lot. I'm designing stuff at the moment, and what you're talking about is resonating to the kind of stuff I'm putting in the training materials, which means that we're all on the same wavelength, which is really important. So thank you for taking the time. Colleagues, thank you for taking the time out. I'm sure you agreed that was a really interesting presentation. So if I could just ask you to do a clap in the in the chat, which seems to be the now convention for a thank you. It's much appreciated. Like I said, we have recorded it. Give me 24 hours and it will be up online, and we will share the link with everybody that came today.